Okay, so let's get started. Xeroderma pigmentosum. It's a rare disease that causes extreme sensitivity. Why I chose Xeroderma pigmentosum, or I'm just going to call it XP from here on out, is because I wanted to choose a topic that maybe the other students that would choose. And another reason why I really like human anatomy is that I think that it's valuable information I can use in horror films. So I guess it's a little bit self-serving, I guess. Anyways, um, yeah, XP causes extreme sunlight sensitivity to UV light, sunlight, and it's very similar to how vampires work in myth and those sorts of things. And so today I'm going to go through these things, like the actual biological aspects of it, how it's diagnosed, how it's treated, and where the current research stands. Okay. All right, so our learning objectives are going to be disease overview, name, system, cause, how common it is, pathophysiology, diagnosis and treatment, and then current research. So basically, it's broken into four parts. First, I'm going to cover what XP basically is, what causes it at the genetic level, and how common it turns out to be across different populations. Second, I'll get into the biology itself, how a single broken repair system inside the body eventually leads to skin damage, and in some patients, nerve damage as well. Third, I'll explain how doctors diagnose and treat XP today, along with long-term outlooks and trends and what their lives look like. Finally, I'll bring us up to speed with all the newest research. Scientists are still actively working to understand this disease better. A lot of interesting information about CRISPR. So, next slide. What is Xeroderma pigmentosum? What the name means is dry, pigmented skin, which is a plain medical description. Basically, it is what it says on the tin, right? Or it does what it says on the tin. But here's the detail that matters the most. Most people with XP cannot repair the damage that sunlight does to their DNA. In a healthy person, the cells have a built-in repair system that quietly fixes sun damage overnight before it becomes a problem. In some people with XP, or I'm sorry, it's somebody with XP, that repair system essentially just never functions. A doctor named Moritz Kopassi first described the disease back in 1874, but it took 100 years before anyone understood why it happened. In 1968, a scientist named James Cleaver figured out that XP cells simply could not repair UV damage the way healthy cells could. Um, so it mainly affects the skin. It can also affect the eyes and nervous system. You can see that not all patients are affected with the central nervous system. Some are about 20 or 30% of patients. Eyes also don't affect all patients, but it does look like it does affect a majority of patients. XP, okay, the genetic cause. XP is caused by a mutation in one of 8 genes, and understanding what those genes normally do explains mostly everything that has to do with this disease. 7 of them run repair systems called nucleotide excision repair, which functions like the cell's overnight cleanup crew, cutting out damaged sections of DNA and patching them before the day's next sunrise exposure. The 8th gene works differently. Instead of repairing the damage, it lets the cell copy its DNA even when it's damaged and still sitting there, a bit like driving over a pothole instead of actually fixing it. XP is what geneticists call autosomal recession, meaning that a child needs a broken copy of the gene from the parent to develop disease. That single fact explains why XP shows up more often in communities that relatives marry each other, so intersanguination. Since the odds of both parents carry the same broken gene, and makes it more likely to show up in the population. All right, next slide. Epidemiology. Okay, so what we'll see here on the slide, you see that it is different prevalence in different communities. So the disease genuinely doesn't care about geography. It shows up on every continent, in every group of people on Earth. What does change, however, is how often it appears, depending on on where you look. In the United States, for instance, XP affects 1 in every 250,000 people, while in Japan, the rate is closer to 1 in 20,000, likely because one specific mutation happens to be more common in their population. Parts of Tunisia, where marriage between relatives is more common, and again, this intersanguination, their rate climbs to 1 in 10,000. The same underlying disease everywhere, but the odds are just shifting depending on your genetic makeup, and those sorts of things, especially the exclination, intermarrying of cousins and such. Once it approaches, I think I was reading, it said something like a 0.3%, that it just starts going haywire, and you start seeing a lot of more prevalence of recessive genes. All right, next slide. Okie dokie. So, okay, so how sunlight damage becomes disease. So we see that there's 5 steps detailed up here. So here's the entire process from start to finish, broken into 5 steps. The first, sunlight hits the skin or the eyes. Second, the UV light damages the DNA sitting within those cells. Third, in a healthy person, the system repairs itself, but with people with XP, that it doesn't get the job done. So fourth, the damage builds up. Again, normal people, that would be fixed. XP does not allow for that damage, so the damage builds up. And then fifth, finally, all of the unrepaired damage eventually causes the cell to grow out of control, forming tumors. Excuse me. This isn't a single dramatic event that happens like once. You get one sunburn and all of a sudden burn, and then all of a sudden you have tumors. But it's something that actually piles up year after year after year. Next slide. All right, so we're going to talk about skin symptoms. This is usually the first place that family notices. So long before the disease becomes known as a genetic disease, people will notice it. About 6 in 10 babies with XP develop a severe sunburn just within the first few minutes outside, far more severe than any other child. So the exposure level is just minute compared to what a normal child would be. The other 4 in 10 usually don't burn as dramatically, but they do develop like a freckle, like spot type thing. We'll see that later on in a photo. So anyway, at an early age, over time, the skin starts to look like it's aging, and fast forward, developing patching, discolorations, thinning, some visible small blood vessels beneath the surface. And then there's an enormous increase of roughly 10,000 times the risk of skin cancer. The average age for the first skin cancer diagnosis for a patient like this is unfortunately 8 years old on average. So yeah, just kind of sit with that for a second. 8. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so moving on to eyes. So some of the eye symptoms. The eye basically take the same kind of hit that the skin does. It's UV exposure throughout the day. About 9 in 10 patients experience some kind of eye problems, including sensitivity to light, redness, chronic dryness, and if left unchecked, the ongoing damage could cause scarring, bad enough to where the patient just absolutely loses all eyesight. Roughly 1 in 10 patients develop eye cancer, and that's exactly why you see a lot of these people with XP wearing these, like, I mean, from back in the day, the blue blockers that just block all over their eyes and such. The wear giant hoodies and such. So yeah, so it's also very essential for them to wear sunscreen, but it's yeah. Okay, so moving on to slide 9. Slide 9, we're going to talk about the nervous system. This is the part where XP feels almost unfair. Some patients also develop nerve damage. It has nothing to do with how much time they spent in the sun. The leading explanation right now is that the nerve cells slowly build up a different kind of damage over lifetime, and that damage has nothing to do with UV exposure at all, because nerve cells, unlike skin cells, don't get replaced once they've been damaged. That buildup simply accumulates year after year after year, and sometimes it shows up later on as a neurological symptom. So yeah, memory problems, weakened reflexes, and brain shrinkage. Okay. Next slide. Okay. How the disease progresses. So it's something that happens relatively quickly. If you do extra research outside of what I've done here, you'll see that there are people that are as old as 51 years old with the disease. They look much older than that. Anyways, I digress. So slide 10. So if you laid out the whole disease on a single timeline, what you'd look like is something like this. So where by your first birthday, you'd start showing some signs. And skin cancer often shows up around the time of childhood, school age. As we discussed earlier, the age was 8. For some patients, nerve problems begin somewhere further down the line and gradually worsen from there. Without any protection at all, almost every patient develops skin cancer. Historically, however, roughly 2 out of 3 unprotected patients didn't survive past the age of 20. That's the reality that doctors are working against. I probably should actually include this. Anyways, there was a woman that had just discussed her having XP, and she lived in Guatemala, and she said that when she was 20, that her family didn't think that she was going to live very long, so they had built her a casket for her when she was 20 years old. So that's a very sombering thought. Okay, let's move on to slide 11. Okay, so diagnosis, what doctors look for. So diagnosis generally works in 3 stages. So first, a doctor will have some sort of suspicion that somebody has XP. It's usually triggered by like extreme sunburn history, those sorts of things. Secondly, what they'll do is they'll do lab tests. Older laboratory tests could demonstrate that a patient's cell were unable to be repaired by UV damage properly. So a lot of the lab tests aren't necessarily as thorough as at least from my reading, as what they could be in other fields. And then third, they actually have now, which I guess would be more thorough. I guess this would be the more thorough part is the gene testing, which is more recent. And the gene testing pinpoints the precise mutation responsible, and this gene is affected. The gene that is affected tells the doctors roughly how much nerve-related risk for a given patient is facing down the road. So doctors can't test for XP before a baby is born. This is just something that has to happen. Again, it's more common in some demographics, some communities than others. We're going on to slide 12. Okay. So slide 12. So there are 2 case studies that I'm going to discuss that talk about XP. So yeah. So The old school laboratory tests could take several weeks and still fail to identify the gene responsible. Gene sequencing, by contrast, reads through the patient's entire genetic code at once. In both these cases, it identified a brand new mutation that nobody had documented before in a matter of days rather than weeks. In one of these two cases, the speed actually corrected a misdiagnosis, since the family had originally been told that their child had a completely different condition than XP. This is the next slide, 13. Right. All right, treatment. Basic treatment, as we've already discussed, we're going to go over is avoidance. So completely avoiding the sun. Again, this doesn't really remove the risks for central nervous system damage. But number one is avoidance of UV lights. Some families structure their entire routines around nighttime in order to avoid the daylight hours where UV exposure is going to be the worst. And then at home they have UV fitted or UV films on their windows. And then every trip they go outside, they're wearing, large, light, blocking clothes, hoodies, those sorts of things, full coverage, with no exceptions. I mean, just even minor exposure to UV is very detrimental to their bodies. So any new skin spots are usually removed relatively quickly, and they're kept. There's a log that's kept on all these things in order to maintain the level of exposure that the patient has. Next slide. Okay, so treatment care. So beyond simply avoiding the sun, there's some really there's a toolkit that people can use and that your doctors can rely on. Certain creams will treat early skin damage before it has a chance to turn into full-blown cancer, while specific pills can prevent new precancerous spots to forming in the first place. There's even a targeted drug research for more advanced skin cancer cases. On the procedural side, doctors use freezing, chemical peels, and lasers to physically remove spots. And there also are eye drops and UV contact lenses that can be used to help avoid exposure. Again, like obviously for the contact lenses, they'd be for eye exposure to UV. Okay. Next slide. All right, so slide 15, the outlook. So here's the bottom line. You have a better outlook and a worse outlook. XP is not the death sentence that it was decades ago, but it still demands a serious lifelong commitment for both the patients and their families. The single biggest factor is how the patient fares in long term is whether they develop nerve problems. Again, this is something that cannot be avoided by just completely eliminating UV exposure. The actual matter, what actually matters more is skin cancer risks, since skin cancer is usually managed with consistent vigilant care. With modern sun protection and regular monitoring, a lot of XP patients today are living well into adulthood. And again, we talked about the woman that was living in her 50s. That I watched a video for that. It was very interesting stuff. Moving on. Okay, we have slide 16. So we're going to talk about study 1, tracking nerve problems. This study is genuinely a big deal in the field, largely because of the size and its length. 93 patients were tracked over 10 years, which is a substantial number for the disease, which is this rare. Researchers tracked nerve symptoms using a standardized scoring system and found that almost 4 in 10 patients developed them over the course of the study. So the key finding was that patients carry more severe gene mutations decline faster than those with milder ones. That gives doctor an actual way to predict a given patient's likely path forward, exactly the kind of prediction tool needed to design and run future clinical trial studies. So basically, that the nerve problems got worse over time for some patients versus others, and same with the gene mutations meant faster nerve damage. With us being able to track these genes and have such a large study like this, moving forward, we should probably have a much more focused idea of where to look and how to do a better study on XP. Next slide. Okay, so study 2 is a full range of symptoms. This is very recent. This is only, I guess, really like a few months old now, if you really think about it, a year old or so. But it's fairly small. It contains of just 10 patients. It was only just a 12-month study. It backs up a lot of the larger studies that were already found that early onset, widespread skin changes, and elevated skin risk are all part of this disease. So when a smaller study like this, again, only for a year and only for 10 patients, it's good to drive us towards a direction of something, but especially for a direction on what we should do for a much larger study. Next slide. New treatments and technologies. So again, we talked about gene testing. There's enzyme lotions, and then there's gene therapy. So looking forward, we'll discuss all three of them. So looking forward, there's three different treatments and technologies. The gene sequencing, which would be the gene testing, obviously allows us to see if somebody has the gene that gives different types of XP in different severities, and allows us to diagnose whether somebody has XP. The new enzyme lotions that they have out now basically help DNA repair using enzymes in the cells, and the early trials have shown that a few precancerous spots have been able to ultimately not to form cancer. And then one of the most interesting things, at least for me, is the gene therapy, in which they would use tools like CRISPR to fix an underlying mutation directly at its source. And that last approach is by far the most ambitious of the three, and we're still looking like it's several years away before we can actually start reaching actual patients with the CRISPR gene therapy. Okay, next slide. Slide 19. So a summary. So here's what I want you to walk away with today. XP is fundamentally a disease of a broken DNA repair, and that a single fact is that the root of the cause of everything else that we've covered. So it's that actual broken DNA repair that causes these damages to the DNA to build up. It mostly targets the skin, but it also targets the eyes, the nervous system, and there's no cure yet, which means that sun protection, early detection, and use of these new creams and such are imperative to keep the patients alive, as well as living their best lifestyle. So there are positive. I think there's a positive outlook for people, especially with the CRISPR gene therapy. So I think that in a couple of years, it'd be very interesting to revisit this and find out where things have gone with XP. Slide 20 is going to be all of my references. Now, These are all the references that are for the slides only, and so that's where you'll see those. And then when in my actual explanation, full 5-page paper, there will be a couple additional references in that one as well. And I think there's so. Anyways, yes. So that's it. That's the references. And without a class, I'm going to go ahead and simulate a Q&A. So, would anybody like to ask any questions? And the questions I would get would be, this is a really interesting topic. Is there any other research you've done outside of this? And as I've discussed throughout the presentation, is that I'm a big fan of YouTube. Is using it more than just an entertainment source. One video I watched was about a woman named Fatima Perez, and she's a 51-year-old woman who lived in Connecticut with XP. It's really moving for you to hear like what was going on through her life and understand, and just anyways, if you can, you should check out this video. Again, her name was Fatima Perez, and yeah, just watch a video about her. The next question would be, with the exponential growth of LLMs and AI models, what do you think the future is with CRISPR? Will diseases like XP disappear? And I do think that's a very interesting question. I'm not very versed in those sorts of things. CRISPR, I've heard about it before I did this research, but every time I hear about it, I think it's something that sounds like magic. And I hope that gene therapy is something that can potentially remove a lot of these diseases that are just negative impacts on so many people's lives. So I guess, again, a couple of years from now, I think it'd be very interesting to see where we are in regards to XP treatment. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.